The fluorescent lights of the emergency room buzzed overhead as Linda pressed her fingers against her temples. Another 16-hour shift was coming to an end, but her body felt like it had been awake for days. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and there was this constant tightness in her chest that never seemed to go away anymore. She was 34 years old and had been working as an ER nurse in Manhattan for almost a decade. Once upon a time, she'd loved this job. She remembered the excitement of her first year, the pride she felt when she helped save someone's life, the satisfaction of comforting a scared patient in their darkest moment. But somewhere along the way, something had changed inside her. The winter had been brutal that year. Wave after wave of patients flooded through the doors. Every bed was full. Every hallway was packed. The staff was stretched so thin that taking a bathroom break felt like a luxury. Linda found herself working double shifts, 3, sometimes 4 times a week. She'd come home, collapse on her couch, still wearing her scrubs, and wake up a few hours later with barely enough time to shower before heading back. Her sister, Patricia, had been calling more frequently. "You sound exhausted," she'd say. "When was the last time you took a day off?" Linda would laugh it off, make some joke about being tough, about how nurses don't get tired. But the truth was, she was falling apart. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Linda was restocking supplies in the medication room when suddenly her vision started to blur. The room tilted sideways, and she grabbed the counter to steady herself. Her heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst right through her ribs. She couldn't catch her breath. The walls seemed to be closing in around her. One of the other nurses found her sitting on the floor, tears streaming down her face, gasping for air. They helped her to a quiet room, made her sit down, brought her water. "It's just stress," Linda kept saying. "I'm fine. I need to get back to work." But her hands were still trembling, and she couldn't seem to make them stop. Patricia showed up at the hospital within an hour. She took one look at her sister and made a decision. "You're coming home with me tonight," she said firmly. "And tomorrow, you're calling in sick." Linda started to protest, but Patricia held up her hand. "Look at yourself. When did you last eat a real meal? When did you last sleep through the night? You're no good to anyone if you collapse." That night, lying in Patricia's guest room, Linda stared at the ceiling. Her mind was racing with all the things she should be doing, all the patients who might need her, all the shifts she was missing, but her body refused to move. She was so tired that even breathing felt like work. The next morning, Patricia sat her down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. "I talked to my therapist about you," she said gently. "She suggested something that might help." Linda raised an eyebrow. "I'm not going to therapy." "I don't have time for that. Just listen," Patricia said. She mentioned music therapy. Classical music, specifically. "There's research about how it affects stress levels, helps with anxiety, improves sleep." She sent me some information. Linda almost laughed. "You think listening to some old music is going to fix me?" "I think you need to try something," Patricia replied, "because what you're doing now is killing you." They sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Linda sighed. "Fine, I'll try it. But I'm telling you, it won't work." Patricia pulled out her phone and started scrolling. She recommended this playlist. "It's got 30 pieces by the big classical composers. Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, Bach, Vivaldi. All the ones you've heard of, even if you don't know classical music." She downloaded it onto Linda's phone and handed it back to her. Linda looked at the screen. The first piece was called Nocturne in E-flat major by someone named Chopin. She'd never heard of it. "Just try it tonight when you're trying to sleep," Patricia suggested. What's the worst that could happen? That evening, back in her own apartment, Linda felt the familiar anxiety creeping in. Her mind was already racing about going back to work the next day. She knew she wouldn't sleep. She never slept well anymore. She remembered the playlist and figured she had nothing to lose. She pulled out her phone, found the music, and hit play. Then she turned off the lights and lay down in bed. The first notes of the piano filled her small bedroom, soft, gentle, flowing like water. She'd expected classical music to be loud and dramatic, full of crashing cymbals and dramatic violins. But this was different. This was quiet. Almost like a lullaby. Linda closed her eyes and just listened. The melody moved up and down, unhurried, like it had all the time in the world. There was something about the way the notes connected to each other, the way one phrase led naturally into the next. It wasn't trying to grab her attention or make her feel a certain way. It was just there, filling the silence. She noticed her breathing was slowing down. The tightness in her chest was still there, but it felt a little less suffocating. Her mind was still racing, but somehow the music created a little space between her thoughts, like it was giving her brain permission to slow down. The Chopin piece ended, and another one began. This one had strings, she thought. Maybe violins. It was a little brighter, a little more uplifting, but still gentle. Still calm. Linda didn't realize she was drifting off until she suddenly jerked awake. I'm sure if she'd been asleep for a few seconds or a few minutes. She checked her phone. 20 minutes had passed. 20 minutes when her mind hadn't been spiraling through worst-case scenarios or replaying difficult moments from work. She settled back into her pillow and let the music continue. The next piece was different again. It had a kind of steady, peaceful rhythm that reminded her of walking through a park. Not that she'd done that in months. When was the last time she'd taken a walk just for the sake of walking? As the fourth or fifth piece began to play, Linda felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Her body was actually relaxing. Her shoulders, which she'd been holding up near her ears for weeks, started to drop. Her jaw unclenched. Her fingers, which had been curled into fists, slowly opened. She didn't make it through the whole playlist that night. Somewhere around the 8th or 9th piece, she fell asleep. Really asleep. Not the fitful, restless half-sleep she'd been getting for months, but actual deep sleep. When she woke up the next morning, she lay still for a moment, taking inventory. Her heart wasn't racing. Her hands weren't shaking. She still felt tired, but it was a different kind of tired. A normal kind of tired, not the bone-deep exhaustion that had been crushing her. Linda reached for her phone and looked at the playlist again. 30 pieces. She'd only heard a handful of them. There were names she recognized from somewhere, even though she'd never really listened to classical music before. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Vivaldi's For Seasons. Bach's Air on the G string. She got up and made herself breakfast, something she rarely had time for. As she scrambled eggs and toasted bread, she played the music again. The morning light came through her kitchen window. For the first time in months, she noticed how pretty it was. Maybe Patricia's therapist was onto something. Maybe there was something to this music thing after all. It was just 30 pieces of old classical music, composed by people who'd been dead for hundreds of years. But somehow, in her tiny apartment in New York City, those pieces had given her the first peaceful night's sleep she'd had in longer than she could remember. Linda took a sip of her coffee and made a decision. She'd give herself one more day off. And tonight, she'd listen to more of the playlist. See what happened? See if this strange, unexpected piece could last a little longer. She had no idea then that this was just the beginning. That these 30 soothing classical masterpieces would change not just her life, but the lives of hundreds of people she hadn't even met yet. 3 weeks had passed since that first night with Chopin's Nocturne, and Linda's morning routine had completely transformed. She woke up earlier now, not because she had to, but because she actually wanted to. The first thing she did was reach for her phone and start the playlist, while her coffee brewed. Bach's Air on the G string would fill her kitchen. There was something about that piece that made even the most ordinary morning feel special. The way the violin sang over the other strings reminded her of watching the sunrise. Slow and steady and full of quiet promise, she'd started keeping a small notebook on her kitchen counter. Nothing fancy, just a spiral-bound thing she'd found in a drawer. Every morning she'd write down which piece she was listening to and how it made her feel. At first, she felt a little silly doing it, like a kid with a diary. But her therapist, who she'd finally agreed to see after Patricia's insistence, said it was a good way to track her progress. November 15th, she wrote. Bach's Air on the G string. Makes me feel like I'm floating. My hands are steady this morning. The drive to work had become bearable again, too. Linda had discovered that Vivaldi's Four Seasons was perfect for the morning commute. She'd always hated driving in New York traffic, the constant honking and sudden stops and aggressive lane changes. But now, with spring playing through her car speakers, She found herself actually enjoying the journey. The violins would dance and play, and somehow the gridlock on the highway didn't seem quite so frustrating. She'd noticed things she'd never paid attention to before. The way the light hit the buildings, a kid in the back seat of the car next to her making funny faces, an old couple holding hands as they waited at a crosswalk at work. The changes were becoming obvious to everyone around her. Tom, one of the doctors she'd worked with for years, pulled her aside one afternoon. "You seem different lately," he said, in a good way. "What's changed?" Linda smiled. "Would you believe me if I said classical music?" He laughed, thinking she was joking. But she pulled out her phone and showed him the playlist. "I'm serious. I listen to this every day. Morning, evening, sometimes even on my lunch break. It's helped with the anxiety." Tom looked genuinely interested. "Huh, my wife's been telling me I need to find a way to manage stress better. Maybe I'll give it a try." But the biggest change wasn't just in how Linda felt. It was in how she worked. One particularly chaotic evening in the emergency room, she noticed something. A family was sitting in the waiting area, clearly distressed. Their teenage daughter had been in a car accident. Nothing life-threatening, but scary enough. The mother was crying quietly while the father paced back and forth, checking his watch every few seconds. Linda remembered a piece from the playlist. Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21, the second movement. It was one of the gentlest, most comforting pieces she'd discovered. She had an idea. She walked over to the family with her phone in hand. "I know the waiting is really hard," she said softly. "Would you mind if I played something? It might help." The father looked confused, but the mother nodded. Linda sat down next to them and started the music, keeping the volume low. Within a few minutes, she noticed the mother's breathing slow down. The father stopped pacing and sat down. They didn't say anything, just listened. When a doctor finally came out with an update about their daughter, they were calmer, more able to process the information. As they walked away to see her, the mother turned back to Linda. "Thank you for that. The music helped more than you know." That moment planted a seed in Linda's mind. If the music could help her, and if it could help that one family, who else might it help? She started small. During her breaks, she'd find patients who seemed particularly anxious or in pain, and she'd offer to play music for them. An elderly man waiting for test results loved Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. A young woman with a migraine found relief in the gentle piano of Chopin's Prelude in E minor. The responses varied. But more often than not, people were grateful. They'd close their eyes and listen, and Linda could see the tension leaving their faces. Their shoulders dropping, their breathing evening out. One night, during a particularly rough shift, Linda was working with a patient named Mr. Rodriguez. He was in his 70s, dealing with chest pain, and the tests were taking forever. He was getting more agitated by the minute, which wasn't helping his condition. "Do you like music?" Linda asked him. "Used to play guitar when I was young," he said. "Haven't listened to much in years, though. Let me play something for you." She pulled up Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony on her phone. It was one of her favorites from the playlist, full of rolling melodies that reminded her of walking through countryside she'd never actually seen. Mr. Rodriguez closed his eyes and listened. After a few minutes, a smile crossed his face. "My wife and I used to listen to this kind of music on Sunday mornings," he said. "Back when the kids were little, we had this old record player." They talked while the music played about his wife who had passed away 2 years earlier, about his children and grandchildren, about the life he'd lived. By the time the test results came back, his blood pressure had dropped, and he was noticeably calmer. "Thank you, nurse," he said, as they prepared to discharge him. "Not just for the medical care. For the music. For listening. You reminded me of good times I'd almost forgotten." Linda went home that night feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. Not just the purpose of doing her job well, but something deeper. A sense that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a way to give people something extra. Something beyond the pills and procedures. She lay in bed that night, playing through the playlist again. She'd listened to all 30 pieces multiple times now, but they never got old. Each time she heard them, she noticed something new. A subtle harmony in the background. The way one instrument would echo another, the careful structure beneath what seemed like simple melodies. Chopin's Nocturne came on. It's the same piece that had started this whole journey. Linda thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. Her panic attacks had become rare. She was sleeping through the night most days. Her hands were steady. The constant tightness in her chest was gone. But more than that, she felt like herself again. The person who'd chosen nursing because she wanted to help people, not just treat them. The person who noticed small details and cared about them. The person who believed that healing was about more than just medicine. Over the next few days, Linda couldn't stop thinking about that moment with Mr. Rodriguez, and the family in the waiting room, and all the other patients who'd responded so positively to the music. She started researching during her lunch breaks. She discovered that there was actual science behind what she was experiencing. Studies showed that classical music could lower blood pressure, reduce anxiety, even help with pain management. Hospitals around the world were using music therapy as a complement to traditional treatment. The more she read, the more excited she became. This wasn't just her personal discovery. This was real, proven, and it was helping people. One evening, she was telling Patricia about her research over dinner. "I keep thinking," Linda said, "what if we could do this on a bigger scale? What if the hospital played this music in the ER regularly?" Patricia raised her eyebrows. "Like background music." "Not just background, intentional. Specific pieces for specific situations. Calming music during wait times, gentle music in the evening. I've seen how it helps individual patients. Imagine if everyone could benefit." "That's a big idea," Patricia said. "Do you think the hospital would go for it?" Linda shrugged. "I don't know, but I think I have to try." That night, as she drove home, Vivaldi's Winter from the Four Seasons played through her speakers. It was one of the more intense pieces on the playlist, full of sharp notes that mimicked icy winds and freezing temperatures. But there was beauty in it too, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, there could be something worth appreciating. Linda thought about what she wanted to do. It would mean putting herself out there, possibly facing rejection. Maybe even criticism from colleagues who thought it was a silly idea. But she'd seen the difference the music made. She'd lived it herself. By the time she pulled into her parking spot, she'd made a decision. Tomorrow, she'd start putting together a proposal. She'd gather the research, document the positive responses she'd already seen, and present it to the hospital administration. It felt ambitious, maybe even a little crazy. A few weeks ago, she'd been barely holding herself together. Now she was planning to change how her entire emergency department operated. But somehow, sitting there in her car with Vivaldi's violins soaring through the speakers, it felt right. She grabbed her bag and headed up to her apartment. Tomorrow would be the start of something new. Tonight, she'd listen to the playlist one more time. Let Beethoven and Mozart and Bach fill her small space with their timeless melodies, and prepare herself for whatever came next. The 30 pieces that had saved her life were about to get a chance. To help save others too, Linda spent the next 2 weeks. Buried in research during every spare moment she had, her apartment became covered in printed studies, highlighted articles, and pages of handwritten notes. She learned about something called the Mozart effect, about how Baroque music with 60 beats per minute could sync with the human heart rate, about neurotransmitters and stress hormones and healing responses. But she knew research alone wouldn't be enough. Hospitals ran on numbers and concrete results. She needed proof that this could work in their specific environment, so she started documenting everything. Every time she played music for a patient, she noted their response. She measured heart rates before and after. She asked patients to rate their anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10. She kept track of how long people waited before becoming visibly distressed. Tom, the doctor who'd first noticed her change, became curious about what she was doing. "You're being very methodical about this music thing," he observed one afternoon. "I want to propose it as a program for the whole," Linda admitted. "But I need data. I need to show them it actually works." Tom thought for a moment. "You know, Dr. Williams is heading the Committee on Patient Experience Initiatives, right? She's been looking for new approaches. Maybe she'd be interested." Linda felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Dr. Williams was intimidating. senior physician who'd been at the hospital for 20 years. She had a reputation for being brilliant, but no nonsense. She didn't suffer fools, and she didn't waste time on ideas that weren't solid. But Tom was right. If anyone could greenlight this kind of program, it would be Dr. Williams. It took Linda another week to gather enough courage to request a meeting. When Dr. Williams's assistant called her back with a time slot, Linda's hands started shaking again. But this was a different kind of nervous than before. This was excitement mixed with fear, the good kind, that meant something important was about to happen. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Linda prepared for it like she was defending a dissertation. She put together a presentation on her laptop, printed out the research studies, compiled her patient observations into neat charts and graphs. She even created a sample playlist with specific pieces for different times of day and different situations. Wednesday night. She couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the 30 classical masterpieces, trying to calm herself down. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata came on, and she focused on the gentle piano notes, letting them slow her racing thoughts. By the time morning came, she'd managed maybe 3 hours of sleep. But she felt ready. Dr. Williams's office was exactly what Linda expected. Neat, organized, with medical journals stacked precisely on shelves and several diplomas hanging on the wall. Dr. Williams herself was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an expression that gave nothing away. She said, gesturing for Linda to sit, "Tom mentioned you have an interesting proposal about music in the emergency department." Linda took a deep breath and launched into her presentation. She talked about her own experience first, being honest about the burnout and panic attacks. Then she showed the research, explaining how classical music affected the nervous system, reduced cortisol levels, triggered the release of dopamine. Dr. Williams listened without interrupting, her expression neutral. Then Linda showed her data from the past 2 weeks. Charts showing reduced heart rates in anxious patients, graphs indicating shorter perceived wait times, testimonials from patients who'd experienced the music firsthand. "I've identified 30 specific classical pieces," Linda explained. "Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, Bach, Vivaldi. They're all available freely, no licensing issues. I've tested them in different situations. Morning pieces that are uplifting but calm, evening pieces that are soothing, gentle pieces for pediatric patients, more structured pieces for elderly patients who often respond better to familiar composers." She pulled out her phone and played a brief clip of Bach's air on the G string. "This is what I play in the mornings. It's steady, peaceful, but not sedating. It creates a calm atmosphere without making people feel drowsy." Dr. Williams held up her hand, and Linda stopped talking, her heart sinking. Here it comes, she thought. The rejection. But Dr. Williams surprised her. "How would you implement this?" "Practically speaking, the ER is chaotic. We have emergencies at all hours. How would music fit into that environment?" Linda felt a surge of hope. Dr. Williams wasn't saying no. She was asking questions. "I think it would work best in specific zones," Linda explained. "The waiting area, definitely. Maybe the observation rooms for stable patients. Not in trauma bays or during critical situations, obviously. We'd keep the volume low, just loud enough to be heard but not intrusive." "And who would manage this?" "I would, initially. I'd create playlists for different times and situations, train other staff on when and how to use them, monitor the results." Dr. Williams leaned back in her chair, studying Linda. "You know there will be resistance. Some staff will think it's frivolous. Some patients might not like classical music." "I know," Linda said. "That's why I want to propose a trial period. 3 months. We implement it, we measure everything, and if it doesn't show positive results, we stop. 3 months is a long trial. Music therapy isn't an immediate fix. It works over time. We need enough data to really see the impact." Dr. Williams was quiet for a long moment. Linda held her breath. Finally, Dr. Williams nodded slowly. "I'll take this to the committee. No promises, but I think there's merit to it. The research is solid, and your preliminary data is convincing, but you'll need to be prepared for pushback. I am, Linda said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. 2 weeks later, Linda got the call. The committee had approved a 3-month pilot program. She'd have a small budget for speakers and equipment, and she'd be expected to provide monthly progress reports. Dr. Williams had advocated for it. Emphasizing the low cost and potential benefits, Linda hung up the phone and immediately called Patricia. They said yes, she said, her voice shaking. They actually said yes. That's amazing. Patricia shouted through the phone. I'm so proud of you. But as the excitement faded, reality set in. Now Linda actually had to make this work. She had to prove that this wasn't just a nice idea, but something that could genuinely improve patient care. The first challenge was the pushback Dr. Williams had warned about. When Linda sent out an email to the ER staff explaining the new program, the responses were mixed. Some people were supportive. Finally, something different, one nurse wrote back. I'd love to have some calm music during night shifts. But others were skeptical, even hostile. We're not running a spa, one of the senior nurses replied. This is an emergency room. People come here for medical treatment, not a concert. One doctor sent a particularly harsh email questioning whether Linda had nothing better to do than play DJ. While people were sick and injured, Linda tried not to let it get to her. But some nights she lay awake wondering if she'd made a mistake. What if the trial failed? What if people hated it? What if she'd overestimated the impact music could have? Patricia would talk her down during these moments. You saw it work, she'd remind Linda. With your own patients, with yourself. You have evidence. Trust that. Installation day came on a Monday morning. Linda arrived early to help the tech team set up small, discreet speakers in the waiting area and 3 of the observation rooms. She'd spent the weekend finalizing the playlists, making sure each hour of each day had appropriate music selected. She'd chosen Vivaldi's Spring from the Four Seasons for the morning hours. Something bright and hopeful to start the day. Afternoons would feature Mozart's gentler piano concertos. Evenings would transition to Chopin's nocturnes and Bach's slower pieces. When the music started playing that first morning, Linda stood in the waiting area and just listened. The opening notes of Vivaldi's violins filled the space. A few people looked up, curious about the sudden addition of music. Most just continued scrolling through their phones or talking quietly with family members. But over the next hour, Linda noticed subtle changes. A woman who'd been tapping her foot anxiously stopped and closed her eyes, listening. A man who'd been pacing near the entrance sat down. A child who'd been crying settled into his mother's lap, distracted by the new sounds. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like people suddenly burst into smiles or thanked her for the music. But there was a shift in the atmosphere. The waiting area felt less tense, less charged with anxiety. By the end of the first week, Linda was collecting feedback. She'd created simple survey cards that people could fill out anonymously. The responses were encouraging. The music made the wait more bearable. Helped me relax while waiting for my mother's test results. Nice touch, made the ER feel less scary. But there were negative responses too. Too loud, not my kind of music. It's annoying when I'm trying to think. Linda made adjustments. She lowered the volume even more. She created a feedback system where people could request the music be turned off in certain areas. She stayed flexible, willing to learn and adapt. The real test came during the first busy weekend. Saturday night in a New York ER was always chaos. Accidents, fights, sudden illnesses. The waiting room was packed. People were stressed. Tempers were running high. Linda watched nervously as Mozart's piano, Concerto No. 21, played softly in the background. She half expected someone to complain, to demand it be turned off, to say it was ridiculous to have classical music playing during such a hectic time. But something unexpected happened. A fight that started brewing between 2 families in the waiting area didn't escalate the way it usually would. Security was ready to intervene, but the situation de-escalated on its own. People sat back down. They stopped yelling. Tom found Linda later that night. Did you see that? He asked. That situation with the 2 families? Normally that would have blown up, but they just calmed down. I noticed, Linda said carefully. She didn't want to claim credit for something that might have been coincidence. "I'm starting to think you're onto something," Tom said. "I've been working tonight's shift, and it just feels different. Calmer somehow." As the weeks progressed, the evidence became harder to ignore. The monthly reports Linda submitted showed measurable improvements. Patient satisfaction scores in the ER were up by 12%. Complaints about wait times had decreased. Staff reported feeling less stressed during shifts. More importantly, there were stories. An elderly woman who'd been terrified about her heart surgery found comfort in Beethoven's Pastoral. Symphony playing in the observation room. A teenager with a broken arm forgot about his pain while listening to Vivaldi. A family dealing with tragic news found some small measure of peace with Chopin's Prelude in E minor providing a quiet backdrop. But success brought new challenges. Other departments heard about the program and wanted to try it. Dr. Williams called Linda to another meeting in the second month. "The administration is interested in expanding this," she said. "Possibly to the ICU, the oncology ward, even the surgical waiting areas. But that would require more from you. More playlists, more oversight, training for staff in other departments." Linda felt overwhelmed and excited all at once. "I could do it," she said. "But I'd need help. Maybe we could get other nurses involved, train them on the program." "That's what I suggested to administration," Dr. Williams said. Then she paused. "There's something else. Have you considered formal training in music therapy?" Linda blinked. "I don't know anything about formal training. I just stumbled onto this because I needed help myself." "Exactly. Which makes your story even more powerful. There are programs that offer certification. Some are even online, so you could do it while continuing to work. The hospital might be willing to sponsor you if you're interested." This idea hadn't even occurred to Linda. She'd been so focused on the immediate program that she hadn't thought beyond the 3-month trial. But now, Dr. Williams was talking about something bigger, something that could become her life's work that night. Linda sat in her apartment with her laptop, researching music therapy certification programs. There were schools that specialized in it, programs that combined psychology, medicine, and musical training. It would take time, maybe 2 years to complete, while working full-time. But it was possible. She thought about how far she'd come in just a few months. From that night when she couldn't breathe, when she thought she might fall apart completely, to now. When she was pioneering a program that was helping hundreds of people, the playlist shuffled to Chopin's Nocturne. The piece that had started everything. Linda closed her eyes and listened, really listened, to every note. She heard the gentle melancholy in it, but also the hope. The way it moved through darkness into light. She opened her eyes and pulled up the application for a music therapy program. Her hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment. This was a big step. This was committing to something that would change the entire direction of her career. But then she thought about Mr. Rodriguez, remembering his wife through the music, about the family in the waiting room finding calm in the middle of their crisis, about every patient who'd closed their eyes and let Beethoven or Mozart or Bach carry them away from their fear for just a few minutes. Linda started filling out the application. The 3-month trial wasn't even over yet, but she already knew this was what she wanted to do. Not just for the next few months, but for the rest of her career. The 30 classical masterpieces that had healed her were about to become her life's mission. And the journey was only just beginning. The 3-month trial period ended on a cold February morning. Linda stood in Dr. Williams's office again, but this time she wasn't nervous. She had a thick folder full of data, testimonials, and documented results. The numbers spoke for themselves. Patient satisfaction scores are up 18% from when we started, Linda explained, pointing to a graph. Wait time complaints have decreased by 23%. That's not because wait times actually got shorter, but because the music makes the waiting more tolerable. Dr. Williams nodded, reviewing the documents. And staff morale? Improved across the board. We surveyed the U.S. staff at the start and end of the trial. 72% report feeling less stressed during shifts. 48% say they sleep better after work. That's significant, Dr. Williams said. What about the negative feedback you mentioned in your monthly reports? Linda had been prepared for this question. About 15% of people don't respond well to the music. Some find it too unfamiliar. Some say it's distracting. We've set up quiet zones where the music doesn't play, and we've trained staff to adjust volume or change the station when patients request it. Dr. Williams set down the papers and looked at Linda. The administration wants to make this permanent, not just in the ER, but expand it throughout the hospital. They're calling it the Healing Sounds Initiative. Linda felt her heart jump. That's wonderful. It is. And they want you to lead it. You'd need to train staff across multiple departments, customize playlists for different medical situations, oversee implementation, and continue tracking results. I can do that, Linda said. Actually, I've already started the certification process for music therapy. There's a program through NYU that I'm enrolled in. It'll take about 2 years, but I can do most of it online and during off hours. Dr. Williams smiled, the first genuine smile Linda had ever seen from her. I recommended you specifically for this role. What you've accomplished in 3 months is remarkable. Not just the program itself, but the way you've handled the resistance, adapted to feedback, and maintained your commitment to patient care throughout.
Ow.
Over the next several weeks, Linda found herself in a completely different role than she'd ever imagined. She was still a nurse, still working shifts in the ER. But now she was also spending time in meetings with hospital administrators, training sessions with staff from other departments, and even occasional interviews with local healthcare. Publications who'd heard about the program, the oncology ward was the first new department to implement the music program. Linda spent days working with the nurses there, understanding the specific needs of cancer patients. The music choices had to be different from the ER, less upbeat, more contemplative. Pieces that acknowledged the seriousness of what patients were facing while still offering comfort. She selected Beethoven's slower movements, Bach's cello suites, Chopin's more reflective preludes. One nurse suggested adding Vivaldi's Winter from the Four Seasons because, as she said, some of our patients feel like they're in the winter of their lives. That piece doesn't pretend everything is spring and sunshine. It acknowledges that winter exists, but finds beauty in it anyway. Linda had never thought about the music that way, but it made perfect sense. The response in oncology was different from the ER. Patients there had more time to listen, to really absorb the music. Linda started hearing stories that brought tears to her eyes. A man in his 60s, undergoing chemotherapy, told her that Mozart's Requiem helped him come to terms with his mortality. "I'm not afraid anymore," he said. "The music reminds me that death is just part of the human experience. It's been part of art and music for centuries. I'm not alone in this." A young woman with breast cancer said that Chopin's nocturnes got her through the worst nights. "When I can't sleep because I'm scared, I put that on. It doesn't take away the fear, but it sits with me in it. Like a friend who doesn't try to fix everything, just stays present." These stories were different from the ER responses. In the emergency room, the music helped people get through immediate crises. In oncology, it was helping people face longer, deeper struggles. Linda documented everything. She was learning that different medical situations called for different approaches to music. The pediatric ward needed brighter, simpler pieces. The ICU needed the gentlest, most subtle background music. The surgical waiting areas needed music that could hold people through hours of anxiety. 6 months into the expanded program, something unexpected happened. The local news picked up the story. A reporter had been in the ER for a minor injury and noticed the music. She asked questions, learned about Linda's journey, and wanted to do a feature story. Linda was hesitant at first. She didn't want to make this about herself, but Patricia encouraged her. "Think about all the other hospitals that might try this if they know about it. Think about all the other nurses who might be struggling the way you were." The news segment aired on a Tuesday evening. It was only 4 minutes long, but they captured the essence of the program. They interviewed Linda, talking about her burnout and recovery. They showed patients in the ER waiting room, listening peacefully to the music. They included statistics about the improved outcomes. The response was overwhelming. Linda's phone started buzzing with messages from old colleagues, nursing school classmates, even people she hadn't talked to in years. But more importantly, She started getting emails from nurses and administrators at other hospitals asking how they could implement similar programs. One email in particular stuck with her. It was from a nurse in Chicago who wrote, "I'm exactly where you were a year ago. I can't sleep. I'm having panic attacks. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Your story gave me hope. I downloaded the same playlist you mentioned. Thank you for sharing this." Linda wrote back immediately, offering to talk on the phone, sharing resources, encouraging the nurse to seek help. It reminded her of how close she'd come to giving up entirely. How, if Patricia hadn't intervened? If she hadn't discovered that Chopin nocturne that first night, she might not still be nursing. The program continued to expand. By the end of the first year, 12 departments in the hospital were using the music program. Linda had trained 43 staff members on how to implement it. She'd created over 60 specialized playlists for different situations, times of day, and patient populations. But success brought challenges she hadn't anticipated. Some staff members who'd been initially resistant became territorial about the program. Wanting to make changes without consulting Linda, some departments weren't maintaining the program properly, playing music at random times or at inappropriate volumes. Linda had to learn to let go of some control while still maintaining the program's integrity. She created detailed guidelines and protocols. She set up a system where staff could suggest changes, but had to provide rationale. She scheduled regular check-ins with each department to ensure quality. It was exhausting. Between her nursing shifts, her music therapy, coursework, and managing the hospital-wide program, Linda was working more hours than she had during her burnout period. But it was a different kind of busy. This time, she was building something instead of just surviving. One evening, she was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, eating a quick dinner between meetings, when an elderly man approached her table. "Excuse me, are you Linda?" "The nurse who started the music program." Linda nodded. "Yes, that's me. I wanted to thank you," he said. "My wife passed away last month in the ICU here. She'd been sick for a long time, and those last days were hard. But the music you had playing in her room, that batch piece with the cello, it gave her peace. It gave us both peace." He pulled out a small photograph. "This is her, right before she got sick. I like to remember her like this, happy and healthy. But I'll also remember her listening to that music, holding my hand, not fighting anymore. Just peaceful." Linda felt tears welling up. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Don't be sorry," he said gently. "Be proud. What you're doing matters. It mattered to her, and it mattered to me. That's why I came back today to tell you that." After he left, Linda sat alone with her half-eaten dinner and cried. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when you realize you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Patricia. "Saw 3 more hospitals announced music therapy programs today. Your idea is spreading. So proud of you, sis." Linda smiled and wiped her eyes. She pulled up the playlist on her phone, the same 30 classical masterpieces that had started this entire journey. Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony began playing through her earbuds. She closed her eyes and listened, letting the familiar notes wash over her. A year ago, she'd been broken, barely holding on. Now she was training others, expanding programs, changing how an entire hospital approached patient care. And it all started with being desperate enough to try something new, something that seemed too simple to possibly work. The music had healed her. And now, through her work, it was healing thousands of others. The journey was far from over, but in that moment, sitting in a hospital cafeteria with Beethoven in her ears and tears on her cheeks, Linda knew she'd found her calling. 2 years had passed since that first desperate night with Chopin's Nocturne. Linda stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, of all places, smoothing down her dress and trying to calm her nerves. In a few minutes, she'd walk onto that famous stage and speak to an audience before the New York Philharmonic performed. A special concert featuring the very pieces that had changed her life. The invitation had come. 6 months earlier, the orchestra's director had read about the hospital program and wanted to do something special. benefit concert that would raise money for music therapy programs in medical settings. They'd asked Linda to share her story first. She peeked out from behind the curtain at the packed auditorium. Every seat was filled. She spotted Patricia in the third row, beaming with pride. Dr. Williams was there too, along with several colleagues from the hospital. But most of the audience were strangers. People who'd simply come for a night of classical music and would end up hearing about how that music had saved lives. A stagehand gave her a gentle tap on the shoulder. 2 minutes. Linda took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She thought about everything that had led to this moment. The panic attacks and sleepless nights, that first playlist. The patients who'd found comfort in the music. The program that had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. She'd completed her music therapy certification 3 months earlier, graduating at the top of her program. She was now officially a certified music therapist, though she still worked regular nursing shifts. She couldn't give up direct patient care. It was where she'd started, and it kept her grounded in why this work mattered. The hospital program had expanded beyond even Dr. Williams's expectations. 15 departments now used the music protocols Linda had developed. The program had reduced stress-related sick days among staff by 31%. Patient satisfaction scores had climbed steadily upward. Most importantly, there were countless stories of individual lives touched by the music, but the impact had spread far beyond one hospital. After the news coverage, Linda had been flooded with requests from medical facilities across the country. She'd spent evenings and weekends consulting with hospitals in Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, even international facilities in Canada, in the UK. The 30 classical masterpieces she'd stumbled upon in her darkest moment were now being prescribed like medicine in over 100 healthcare settings worldwide. 1 minute, the stagehand said Linda had prepared remarks, notes written on cards in her pocket, but standing there waiting to walk onto that stage, she realized she didn't need them. This story had been written into her bones. She'd lived every moment of it. The introduction began. She heard someone speaking about her work, about the program's success, about how music and medicine were coming together in new ways. Then her name was called. Linda walked onto the stage, and the audience applauded. The lights were bright, but she could see faces in the front rows. Curious faces. Interested faces. Some looked skeptical, like they weren't sure what a nurse was doing at Carnegie Hall before a classical music concert. She reached the microphone and paused, taking in the moment. This was real. This was happening. 2 years ago, she began, I was dying. Not physically, but in every other way that matters. I was a nurse who couldn't help herself. I was so exhausted, so burned out, so lost, that I didn't know if I could keep going. The audience was quiet now, listening. My sister gave me a gift that night, though she didn't know that's what it was. She told me to try listening to classical music. 30 pieces by composers I'd heard of but never really listened to. Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, Bach, Vivaldi. Linda smiled, remembering that skeptical version of herself. I thought it was ridiculous. I thought music was just background noise, something pleasant but ultimately meaningless. I was wrong. She told them about that first night, about Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major playing while she lay in bed, about how her breathing slowed and the panic receded. She described the weeks that followed, discovering each piece, learning how different composers spoke to different needs. Bach's air on the G-string became my morning ritual, she said. Vivaldi's Four Seasons got me through traffic. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata helped me sleep. These weren't just pretty sounds. They were medicine. The audience was completely engaged now. She could see people leaning forward, caught up in the story. Linda talked about bringing the music to her patients, about the first family in the ER waiting room, about Mr. Rodriguez remembering his wife through Beethoven. She described the 3-month trial, the resistance she'd faced, the evidence that slowly accumulated proving that this strange idea actually worked. The data was important, she said. Reduced anxiety, lower blood pressure, improved satisfaction scores. But the stories were what really mattered. The cancer patient who found peace through Mozart, the elderly man whose wife died while Bach played softly in the background, The child who stopped crying when she heard Vivaldi's violins? She paused, emotion catching in her throat. Music didn't cure their illnesses. It didn't make the hard things go away. But it gave them something to hold on to. It reminded them that beauty still exists, even in dark times. It connected them to something larger than their immediate pain. Linda pulled out her phone, the same phone that had played that first Chopin nocturne. This playlist still lives on my phone. I listen to it almost every day. These 30 pieces have become my companions, my teachers, my comfort. They're always there when I need them. She looked out at the audience. Tonight, you're going to hear some of these pieces performed live by one of the greatest orchestras in the world. As you listen, I want you to think about someone you know who's struggling. Someone who's in pain, physically or emotionally. Someone who needs healing. Her voice grew stronger. Because this music has power. Not magic power, but real, documented, measurable power to change how we feel, how we heal, how we cope with the hardest moments of our lives. And the most beautiful part is that it's available to everyone. You don't need a prescription. You don't need insurance approval. You just need to listen. Linda shared the numbers then. Over 120 hospitals now using music therapy protocols based on her program. Thousands of patients helped. Dozens of nurses and therapists trained. New research being conducted on music's effects on healing and recovery. But more than the numbers, she said, what matters is this. Somewhere tonight, a scared patient will hear Mozart and feel a little less afraid. A grieving family will sit together, listening to Chopin, and find comfort in sharing that moment. A burned-out nurse will discover what I discovered, that there's hope and healing in the most unexpected places.